Hello and welcome to Guy Cocker's Video Games Podcast, episode 14 on the 6th of August 2013. I'm your host, Guy Cocker, and on this week's show, I'm in the office of one of the UK's most promising new developers to talk about the week's news, address your feedback, and give away some cool prizes. Time to introduce my guests. They are today from Roll7 Games, who are currently putting the finishing touches to their PlayStation Vita exclusive skateboarding game, OlliOlli. My first guest is John Robbins, who designs the game itself. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks very much for inviting us into your office.
No worries.
I'm also joined by Thomas Hegarty, who is the producer and runs business development at the studio. Hello to you, Tom.
Hey, how you
Is
doing?
it Thomas or Tom? I didn't ask you this. We'll show. Let's go with Tom. So, guys, tell us a little bit about Roll7. We're here in New Cross, just outside sort of London Bridge area in London. Tell us about the studio, Roll7, and your game, OlliOlli.
You're looking at me, I'm looking at you. You go first.
Look at confused faces.
Okay, so I'll give the history of Roll7. I think if you go into the more detail about what we're doing now. We've been going for about 5 years. We actually started life out as a digital agency with the ultimate aim was to always make our own video games. Took us about 4 years to get to that point. We had to build up enough cash in the bank, but along the way we kind of learned a lot about the games design process anyway, in terms of the projects we were doing for the home office, for marketing companies,
right.
Facebook games, etc. It's all been a really good learning experience. And then at Develop last year, John met James Marsden from Future Lab, and that kind of put us on the journey to where we are at the moment. So I'll let John talk about that fateful meeting.
Yeah, so we were there actually showing off our first iOS title called Gets the Exit, which reviewed quite nicely, but was ultimately probably way too hard for the iOS market.
Right.
But in going to show that off, ended up meeting James and showing him a prototype for another game we had, a skateboarding title, which at the time was called OlliOlli, which was much harder to say than OlliOlli. And he put us in touch with the guys at Sony, and we went and showed them. They really liked it, and they suggested that it might be a title that would work on the Vita. Mm-hmm. And so it really went from there, and we've been building it for Vita now since January this year.
Right, okay. And so it's going to be a PlayStation Vita exclusive, at least for the time being.
It is.
And explain a little bit about the game, because it's a skateboarding game, but less in the sort of vein of Tony Hawk's and more of the sort of classic side on.
Yeah, so it's I guess some people have sort of said it's sort of like Cannabolt meets Skate. Mm-hmm. So it's side-scrolling, you go from left to right, the game continuously chucks obstacles at you. I guess unlike a lot of 2D skateboarding games, you've actually got tons and tons of tricks and grinds and things like that. So it's very much a high scores battle. It's trying to string together ridiculous combos and pull off complex tricks at the same time without slamming on your face.
Okay.
I guess kind of the bit that makes it different from even 3D skateboarding games is that we've got this mechanic that messes everybody up, where you've got to hit X to land your trick.
Right.
So every time you're falling, if you don't hit the X button before you hit the ground, you basically lose all of your points.
Right, okay.
So it's not just about wanging the stick around like a maniac and pulling off loads of tricks. It's also about timing your landing as well to absolutely nail the combo at the end.
So, John, as a designer of this particular game, where did the inspiration come from? You look interested in skateboarding in general? Or?
Yeah, well, it's actually a game I tried to make when I first got Click and Create when I was about 13.
Right.
But obviously had no idea what I was doing, so I couldn't actually make it. And it wasn't until last year, picking up Multimedia Fusion, that I built the prototype. But as a skateboarder, as a kid, I'd always wanted to make a game where the landing bit was just as important as the tricking bit. Because I think anyone that's been on a skateboard knows that anyone can hoof a board around and make it do some crazy flips in the air, but actually putting your feet back on it afterwards is the real challenge.
Right, so and that's what you wanted to capture in the game with this kind of mechanic where you've got to press X to land it.
Yeah.
And so where are you at now? You've been building it for sort of 7 months now. Is it nearly 8 months? So what's the release pattern looking like? Is it going to come out this year?
Yeah, hopefully. I'm getting looked at by Tom now because he's the guy that calls this.
Yeah, we're very hopeful for a release this year. We've just put a plan in place which would get us out a good few weeks before Christmas.
Right.
I can't give the exact date at the moment because I need to talk to Sony about that. But yes, we're on our going into a final milestone to hit beta at the end of August, and then have a few weeks to tidy it all up and put it in for submission from there.
And how does it work with? I haven't spoken to a kind of a developer of just a PlayStation Vita exclusive before, but I've heard a lot about sort of the pub fund and all the rest. How that works, and how does it work with the relationship with Sony? Do they support you with Vita development tools and all the rest of it? Is there any kind of funding behind that?
Yeah, so we're not published, but we are funded. So we're part of Shahid Ahmad's and his team's content drive.
Right.
So it's kind of right place at the right time for us. So, like I say, in terms of the funding, it means that obviously we can bring on the developers that we've got here to help make the game to what we want it to be, and that kind of sees us through for a certain period of time. In terms of the support we get, it's actually really good. So there's two folds of support. There's got our producer Spencer, and we meet him at various milestones, and he gives us feedback every time, and that goes out to the team, goes out to other people within Sony, and they come back to us with their thoughts. And what's interesting about that process is it's, even though we're a funded program, we don't have to take their advice on board.
Right.
So after the first meeting, I think John came away. They said, I think the game was even harder before, and if you didn't press X at the right time, you slammed.
Right.
Now we've kind of got a degree of variance in there. So if you press it too late or early, you just have a sloppy landing.
Right.
I think the thing is they sort of say, obviously they say we're giving you this advice. You don't have to take it. It's just our advice. But I think what we've learned from that process is the people that are giving you that advice really kind of do know what they're talking about.
Sure.
So I think we came away from our first meeting going, oh, they want us to change loads of stuff. And I think we realised the other day that we've actually implemented every single suggestion that they made in that first meeting by now, often thinking it was us that had come up with it.
Right.
Going, oh, it'd be really good if we did this. Yeah, they suggested that.
And are those meetings fairly regular? Is it?
At every milestone. But we can talk to them all the time. There's DevNet, which is the online forums.
Right.
We've had some issues with our audio engine recently, and they're actually sending someone out to come and have a look at the code as well, which is brilliant. That kind of support is priceless, really.
Okay. I have to ask: is there any chance of release on other platforms in future? Or is it just Vita for the time being?
It's interesting. I mean, it's Vita exclusive for a set period of time. But I think even when Sony talk to us, they're saying, well, obviously when you look at releasing it on other platforms, I think they're realistic enough about what we'll want to do as a games developer. But obviously we've got a degree of loyalty to Sony as well. But it's nice they're very open about it. But obviously for them, the more successful we are, then we're more likely to then go back to them and be able to self-fund projects for their titles in years to come.
Sure. Do you think? Sorry, John.
I was going to say, I think there's also sort of from our point of view in terms of like the actual game design, it's quite a Twitch reaction game that requires like kind of precision in what you're doing. So as much as we'd like to take it to as many platforms as possible, sort of where the game is now, it's actually not that suited to say touch devices where you maybe don't have the same tactile feedback.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, we'd like to bring it to lots of stuff, but I think it's not just a case of sticking it on every platform, but sticking it on platforms where it actually will work.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the original iOS concept feels really limited.
Right.
There's only a certain number of tricks you can do. It just doesn't have the same feel to it.
And in terms of future plans after OlliOlli, and assuming it's a big success, I mean, would you like to think about sequels of the game or moving to different platforms, or as you say, sticking with Sony?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've already had some thoughts actually about what we could do with the game. For example, there's no multiplayer. That's something we'd really like to put in the game. We've looked, of course, at all the kind of social features that PS4 is bringing. There's some cool stuff we could do with the spectate and command, and those kind of features I think could really lend themselves nicely to the game. Talking about could you actually, player 2 or the spectator could actually be building a level for someone in advance as you're skating it, so you're not quite sure what's coming up. If you like the person you're playing with, give them a nice grind combo. If you don't, you put a road cone in the way, and
that'd be really cool.
Try and make them slam. So yeah, there's lots of kind of things we're looking at in terms of that.
And with that working relationship that you guys have with Sony being so close, I mean, I'm going to Gamescom in a couple of weeks, expecting to see more of PlayStation 4 and the cross-feature functionality. Do you get access to cool PlayStation 4 type stuff, and obviously what's happening with Vita further down the line, or is it?
Yeah, I mean they've actually sent us a dev kit, so we haven't had a time to actually get on it, unfortunately. So we've kind of locked it away at the back of the office. But yeah, we hear a lot about it. We went to a couple of talks before they did the big reveal, which was really interesting. One the NDA at the time. and we found a lot about the functionality that has only really started with stuff that started coming out now as well. So we have had time to kind of think about what we'd like to do. I mean, there's nothing kind of in stone yet.
Sure.
In terms of what we're going to do on PS4, we'd love to take OlliOlli to that platform.
And how do you guys find it being developers in London? Obviously, there's quite a lot of people around, sort of, the Shoreditch area. Some of whom I've spoken to on the podcast. But you're sort of, I guess, a little bit southeast, aren't you? Really down here. How do you find it being in London? Because a lot of people would look at that and go, "It's incredibly expensive. Why are you based down here?"
Not here. We're in the ghetto.
No, you're in the ghetto.
Yeah, this is southeast London, massive. I'm actually from this area, which is kind of why the office is down here.
It's pure convenience. I hear you're northwest.
So yeah.
It's a 20-minute walk.
It's an hour and a half on the train for me.
So, but there's a kind of history as to why we're here. But it's in terms of New Cross, it's actually incredibly cheap rent.
Right.
There's when we were a digital agency a few years back, we looked at could we move up to Shoreditch, but then you'd have to make another 15-20 grand profit just to cover that extra office space. Then you're doing another job just for the sake of it.
Sure.
And now we just want to keep our overheads as low as possible.
Of course. So, where can we find out more about OlliOlli before we move on to the rest of the show?
Okay, a number of places. So we've got our Facebook page, which will be Facebook, search for OlliOlli, which is OLLI.
No space.
No space and no ease. You can follow myself or John on Twitter. I'm Thomas_Hegarty.
Right.
And John is at Flappy Fingers,
Okay.
obviously.
FLAPPYFINGERS.
And then at Roll7 as well. That's the company Twitter.
We've been incredibly lax with our YouTube recently, but we should be getting some more gameplay videos up soon on
if you wanna
YouTube.
check it
So
out.
check Roll7 Games on YouTube as well.
Good stuff. All right, guys, we're going to talk through the competitions and news and feedback. Before we get into the show, please, whatever you think about it, you guys listening out there, email podcast@guycocker.com and let me know what you think. Last time we had 3 copies of Grid 2 to give away to celebrate the release of new DLC for the game. We had loads of entries for this one, so thanks to everyone who got in touch and correctly knew that Edward Snowden is the famous whistleblower currently in Moscow Airport. Our winners are Doug Greenwood, Perry Urban and Andrew Russell. Congrats. I spoke to Codemasters yesterday, guys, so I will get your details to them and they'll be in touch to find out your preferred format. This week we don't have a competition, but I'll be back next week with a new competition, so watch out for it then. All right, it's time to talk about this week's feedback. First, let's run down the emails. Gareth Tomlinson says, Guy, I appreciate you had some feedback about the hardcore nature of your podcast previously. Is this why you invited 2 guys who appeared to have no gaming knowledge at all on the show last week? Joking aside, Chris and Bart had some interesting views on some of the art and social angles of gaming, but I'd expect the majority of people who tune into your podcast want a degree of deeper gaming knowledge, and I bet they all know what DLC is too. So, not a question, but a request for more of that, plus more Holly B from the community podcast a few weeks ago. She's the best thing to happen to gaming in ages. She's the social community manager over at Sony, actually. So last week I had a couple of friends of mine who...
I really hope that we don't let you down, Gareth. I'm kind of terrified now.
This is an ongoing piece of feedback. Those guys, one of them's a games designer. He made Alice for iPad and is now making a new game which he hasn't announced yet. But the thrust of his argument last week was he doesn't play modern games because he's not attracted to them, and he said that a lot of novelists are the same way. They don't read other novels. He's just not interested in them, so he's doing his own game to kind of satisfy that itch and make a game that he'd want to play. Not having listened to the podcast or to kind of know this guy, do you agree or kind of have an opinion on this, on games developers that don't play games? Do you know any?
Does he not play them because he's not interested, or does he not play them because he doesn't have time because he's making a game?
He felt the sort of halcyon days for games were back in the 90s. The sort of Grand Theft Auto 3, and the only game that he's really enjoyed recently is Journey. I just think he thinks a lot of modern games like the Call of Duties and I guess I'm trying to think of the other examples he used, but the modern shooters just don't do it for him, and he's just not interested in the violence.
Okay, well, I think it's interesting. Like, obviously, I've scrolled through your list of feedback for this week, and it's sort of it is a common theme. I think it sort of depends what you want. It's sort of a bit like people saying they don't go and see the Marvel tie-in movies because they're all just sort of boring in 3D.
Sure,
but sometimes you just want to shoot people in the face and not
right,
have a storyline.
Exactly.
And I think they've all got a place.
Well, I appreciate the feedback and thanks for that. I didn't want to get those guys on because I thought they had an interesting story. They are developing a game and they host a gaming podcast as well. But like I say, they don't actually really play that many games. So thanks for the feedback, and I will try and get more guests on who know their games. Like I say, hopefully you guys can help out with this.
I haven't played a game in the last
never
10
played
years.
a game. Oh dear.
What's DLC?
It's DLC, yeah, that was actually I genuinely didn't know. Next email from Graham McKay in Bavaria, originally from Glasgow, says, Dear Guy, you asked me to email my feedback following my tweet, but I didn't manage to find the time before your latest show, which was great. I don't know if my topic will still be relevant, but I want to send it on anyway. I've also added another thing that I've been thinking about recently. So my original question was, what do you think the next-gen systems would look like if these two things had not happened? There had been no pre-E3 rumours of the draconian measures Xbox had in mind, and Sony's press conference had been first. Do you think we would be facing two expensive consoles with anti-consumer profiles like the Xbox before the 180? I'm a Sony fan, but I find it quite amusing how everyone is making them out to be some kind of moral winner. If Xbox had not set up the pins so well, Sony would have nothing to knock down. My second point is regarding Nintendo. Following your praise of the Wii U and 3DS, yourself and the guys at Midnight Resistance are the only people that don't seem to be going for Nintendo's throat. I decided to invest in both machines. I've become utterly addicted to Animal Crossing, and my girlfriend and I are really enjoying Mario U. My girlfriend is not really a gamer, so I was surprised to hear her say, just seeing Mario makes me smile. I think this is the kind of thing Nintendo should really be working on. They make really enjoyable games that don't push the envelope, but in the end, do we need the envelope pushed that much? If Nintendo were to release a modern-day version of the SNES, I think they could really take on the other two. I kind of visualize a Nintendo system that only plays games built for it. It doesn't play cross-platform games, only ones designed for the system. A simple, modern system with two simple control pads that play Nintendo games, and also the function to allow us to download and buy games from the Nintendo back catalogue. Nintendo has flirted with casual gamers long enough. It's time for them to go back to making awesomely entertaining video games. This is probably unrealistic nonsense, but I know one thing for sure. I'd buy that system in front of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. That's from Graham McKay, who's based in Bavaria. So guys, what do you think? I mean, were you at E3? Did you watch the E3 stuff? Do you think that it would have been different if the sort of E3 rumours of draconian measures that have now been abolished, do you think it would have been different if those rumours hadn't been about, and also if Sony's press conference had been first?
Well, my visa got declined, so I didn't get to go.
Oh,
so
no.
I'm going to pass this one to Tom.
So, I had to get on the plane 11 hours on my own because John wasn't allowed.
Right.
Yeah, really, really interesting point, actually, and something we've been discussing since. I was following on Twitter because we'd also passed the show and we were demonstrating OlliOlli there, but we weren't allowed into those press conferences. And just following on Twitter, it was very much, everyone was saying Sony had won that particular battle. I think them going second is very interesting. I mean, I don't sit around the board of Sony, so I've got no idea what happened, but it'd be, from a business point of view, they must have been looking at it going, well, hang on a minute, what can we do differently here? Sure. What can we say? They must have had something, that they could pull out the bag to try and win that day, whether, I don't know, it's to do the price or in terms of the DRM.
Or that amazing video on how you share games on PlayStation.
Exactly. So I've seen it being quite bullish, and sort of, being confident and taking the mick.
But I think what's interesting now is in terms of what Xbox have managed to do is they've kind of almost gone back on all that stuff, and rather than being chastised for that, people are going, oh right, okay, well they're actually kind of drawing level with a PS4, so it's going to be quite similar. And then in another step, they've made the 360, or they announced it recently, it's going to be a dev kit, which is obviously going to be really good for indie developers as well.
I think not at launch, it's a feature they're going to add to it later, but it's an important step, definitely.
Yeah. So, I think the other point that me and John were discussing as well was the fact that we talk about it in the game industry and press circles. So I think our view is kind of, obviously, meant to have a finger on the pulse, and when I've talked to my friends about it as well, I don't think it's as big a deal.
Right.
I think I've asked a lot of people which you're going to buy, and it's a complete mixture. A lot of people still say both.
Right.
I don't think a lot of the issues are, I mean, maybe putting my foot in here, but from my experience, people I've spoken to, the issues maybe aren't as big a deal for them. By the time it comes around in October, or November, when they're launched, people might well have forgotten what's happened and be comparing them as they are now.
I mean, I think it's almost comes back to some of the previous comments you had.
Yeah.
where people are saying, "Oh, I don't really play Call of Duty because it's mainstream, and I just want to play indie games." But I think actually, people who play indie games are quite a niche, and there's a whole ton of people who are perfectly happy to play the new Call of Duty and FIFA and everything else. So I think from their point of view, it's like, is the Xbox One going to play those things?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, and it's got Netflix and television, so wonderful.
Yeah.
And a dog I really care about.
A dog, yeah. 20 million people buying it for that dog. And then the Nintendo system, where are your thoughts at with Wii U and 3DS, guys? I mean, I kind of assume you're quite close ties with Sony, but do you have a 3DS or a Wii U in the office? There's a lot of old gaming tech in the office here.
The old Game Gear.
There's a Master System behind that massive sheet of polystyrene as well.
We've actually met the Nintendo guys recently. I think they're starting to kind of go out and try and meet indie developers as well.
Right.
It's an interesting point that he makes in terms of, can it go back to what it was like? But
I play. Whenever I want to show a game off to my friends, it's kind of like Uncharted or something that's really, really graphically and impressive, and Uncharted is very narratively impressive as well. But yeah. People always want to go back and play Sonic or Mario as classic games, really. But anyway, you were saying, I was just interrupting you.
No, so I think obviously the Wii U feels like a very different console.
Yeah.
So obviously what PlayStation and Xbox are going to do. So they do seem like different products. But from what we've heard, it does seem like they're starting to follow a similar line to those two consoles, where you may start seeing more games similar to what you'd find on those two platforms.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
I was interested by his comment where he's saying that he didn't feel like they really pushed the envelope.
Right.
I think it's quite interesting because almost neither of them are. If you look at something like Call of Duty on Xbox, gameplay-wise, that hasn't changed a great deal in the last 15 iterations of it.
Yeah.
I feel like Nintendo maybe don't push graphics as hard, but they're kind of doing the same thing. There's not a huge. I'm going to get absolutely slaughtered for saying this. It's not a huge difference in Mario titles or Mario Kart titles.
No, or Pikmin or whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah, but they're great games and people are happy to play them. And, a new iteration of it, it's got a couple of new bits going on. There's some new people to play as, and that's something fun to do.
Sure. Well, we'll see. We'll see where the Wii U is going. At the moment, obviously, lots of stories doing the rounds about disastrous sales over the last quarter. But I think that Nintendo... They'll stick on the path. They'll release some good games for it this year. Already seen some good ones. I mean, Bayonetta 2 looks fantastic. May not sell the system, but I think they're going to have a steady stream of quality games coming through. So I'm really excited about Wii U. Next email's from James Briefel. He says, and hopefully I'm getting that pronunciation right. He says, in your last episode, you talked a lot about the graphical fidelity of modern games and how it has an impact on the way we judge gameplay. That older games weren't as exposed to flawed gameplay mechanics as some are today. That as graphics and physics engines and so on advance in their ability to create realism, our imaginations as gamers find less room to fill the gaps. I feel that this is due to the emergence of a new platform for developers to make games. When you mentioned Quantic Dream's Heavy Rain and its upcoming project Beyond Two Souls, I feel that although games like Journey, Heavy Rain and The Walking Dead were soft on gameplay, it didn't once detract from the overall experience for me. Their storytelling enhanced the experience for the player, which replaced the need for constant gameplay to keep me engaged. The Last of Us is an example where great story and gameplay coexist, and where violence and violent gameplay is justified as it is given time to develop a story that puts such violence into context. I personally seek out titles that have a decent story to tell in order to keep me interested, rather than grinding around gameplay that is repetitive and boring. So my question is, do you think that great storytelling... I'm on Windows 8 and I just flipped the wrong window. So my question is, do you think that great storytelling can replace gameplay to enhance a player's experience? And are developers just starting to drift games into interactive movies? He says, P.S. I really enjoy the podcast and subject topics that are brought up. It's nice to listen to British gaming podcasts for once. Americans, while great, can be so rowdy. It's a great show to have on during my day-to-day commute. I hope you use my question. And that's from James Briefel. So guys, lots of points made there. But the question is, do you think great storytelling can replace gameplay to enhance a player's experience? Like, I guess you could say in Journey, there's not too much gameplay in there. Is that a fair criticism?
This is one of those things that always then tends to start. It's a bit like our games art conversation. I feel like stuff like Journey or Proteus as well. I think that caused a bit of a storm with that question. I think they're different experiences. I think to say that all games now need to have some kind of storyline that will engage you. But I mean, like I was saying earlier, sometimes you just want to shoot people in the face and chuck hand grenades at them.
Sure.
And to be honest, putting story in there, it just ends up feeling like a sort of low-rate Steven Seagal film, and I'm just going to press X to get through those story sections so I can get on with killing people or whatever it is you're trying to do.
They still do it though. They still bring in. God, I've forgotten his name now, but David Escoya from the Batman series to write those. Well, supposedly write those things. I believe that he's kind of maybe a script consultant and that sort of stuff. But what is there a compelling backstory to OlliOlli? Is there?
He's a skater on a mission. No, there is no backstory.
There's no backstory.
I think our other games in development also have no backstory. It's purely about, I suppose, just fun mechanics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Arcade, I suppose, is a good way to describe what we're trying to do.
Yeah. But what about a developer sort of drifting into interactive movies? I mean, I look at The Walking Dead, and that's probably feels like the most influential game on journalists, at least in the last year or so, and I can feel a lot of the mechanics of that, although a lot of them were essentially QuickTime events, a lot of the mechanics of them making it into other games. Do you mean
I kind of feel like I don't mind, and there have been a couple of games where, you know, you do kind of get sucked into the story, but I sort of also, like with The Walking Dead, some of those story or some of those interactions were it almost felt like you didn't know what you had to do.
Right.
So I seem to remember there's a bit where there's a zombie crawling at you, trying to reach for a hammer, and you can get a little girl to pass you the hammer, and then you can smash its face in.
Yeah.
And sort of gamer logic says, well, I should smash the zombie until it stops playing any animations, and there's just like blood everywhere.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you realise you can't do that because you're going to scare the little girl. And what are you going to do?
I think the first episode is fairly early on. Yeah.
I have to admit, I only played the first one.
Right.
And then so you don't kill the zombie, and then you get eaten.
Yeah.
And you kind of felt like the designers were messing with you. I think it's fine. I think you still have to find a balance. Like you don't want to end up playing an interactive movie where you're just watching 20 minutes of cutscene between literally walking to the next cutscene.
Absolutely. Although that is essentially Metal Gear Solid, or a lot of Metal Gear Solid.
I just didn't want to say the words Metal Gear Solid so I wouldn't get trolled.
Very popular game. All right, moving on. John Merrigan says, "Hello, Guy. Really enjoying the new podcast. I'm a 32-year-old gamer who recently realised I've been gaming for 25 years, ever since I was given an Atari console as a kid. The realisation has got me thinking of how games have changed in the time I've been playing them. I'm looking for a book that would give me a good history of gaming over the years. Would you or your guests or listeners know of any that would be worth my time? I've owned a lot of consoles over the years, my favourite being the SNES, closely followed by the PlayStation 3. Any questions, or any suggestions, you might have would be greatly appreciated." So I got on Twitter and put out some emails and tried to find out some good books. One of my favourite ones, this is a long time ago, was Game Over, which was about Nintendo's sort of history through the 80s and 90s. I believe that I've got one here on Amazon, Jacked, the unauthorized behind-the-scenes story of Grand Theft Auto. I believe that's very good, actually. I think it's got some good stories of kind of the culture and mentality of kind of Rockstar and their New York-based escapades, like lots of drinking and all that sort of stuff, I think, in there. And then I just saw a book by a journalist that's called Replay, the History of Video Games. And I even went into Waterstones on the weekend to try and find out more. There's a I think 1001 Video Games That You Must Play by Tony Mott, who edits Edge magazine. So there's quite a few out there. Have you guys read any? Maybe more on the academic side.
Oh, I had two suggestions actually. One of them, is on the academic side, and it's really quite dry, but it's sort of interesting. Which was Half Real by Jesper Joel.
Yeah, okay.
Which sort of looks at rules in games and their progressions from board games to video games.
Right. Okay.
Which maybe isn't the best bedtime reading, but it's certainly interesting.
If you're interested in the history and how they've developed.
Yeah, and the other one, which actually isn't factual or about the history of games, but I'm actually reading it at the moment, is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline.
Yeah, I've heard it's very good.
But just seeing that he's been playing games like my first console was the Atari as well, and obviously there are so many references in that book to sort of 80s and early 90s video game culture.
So just a bit of background. What is it? It's a fiction.
It's a fiction. It's sort of matrix social network that everyone connects to, and the guy that's created it was a big sort of fan of 80s pop culture.
Right.
And he's sort of he's hidden Easter eggs in this virtual world that people can find to win a competition. But in order to find the Easter eggs, you've got to have like a really deep understanding of 80s video game culture. So if you were playing games back then, there's an awful lot of references that will appeal.
I don't think you're going to get a better book for like kind of children of the 80s. Really, that's kind of.
Yeah, I was reading it and it's just going, oh, I played that. Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
And I remember actually reading Trigger Happy by Stephen Poole a lot, like about 10 years ago when I was working at a job working on the beach, like renting out deck chairs on the beach where I grew up, and I remember reading that, and I wasn't quite clever enough to understand a lot of it at the time, but it's a very academic book on video games. I actually met Stephen Poole about 2 months ago for the first time, and yeah, he's again a columnist for Edge. Do you have any tips at all? Any video game books?
I'm afraid not. I haven't read any sort of book for about 3 years.
It's the same for me. It's the same for me. I need to get more into
I've read some good
reading.
business books, but I don't think they're relevant for this particular conversation.
I actually put, and I'll come on to this in a sec, in full, I put out on Twitter, because it seemed to be, I was in Waterstones, there was lots and lots of biographies about film stars, but there weren't any biographies about game makers. So I put a call out on Twitter saying, who would you read a book about that, famous game designers? Would it be Molyneux, or would it be Shigeru Miyamoto, or would it be Yu Suzuki, or Ken Levine, or would there be any that you two would want to read about, that kind of find out more about? Because they've got to have that combination of like an interesting personality, and obviously have made some great games, I think.
Well, I think we were saying earlier, I think I don't want to stray into hipster territory, but obviously like Indie Game the movie I thought was really interesting, because it's got that sort of angle of personal struggle as well. Like they're always, I haven't got a job and I'm working on this for the love, and so it's got that interesting side to it. So I think I'd be interested to read a bit more about maybe people that have sort of come out of the blue and developed a quite off the wall indie title, or have just come out of nowhere. Not that it's not interesting to read about someone like Blazinski or Molyneux or whatever, who've been in the industry forever. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to hear about how maybe people that didn't grow up in the industry, who've made a successful title, what on earth possessed them to decide to try and make a video game.
So it's a good one. Yeah. So someone like, although he's quit now, Full Fish would be good. You missed that. That was last week when we were talking about that. What was the guy that did Super Meat Boy? I totally forgot his name now. Is it Eduardo or? I've totally forgot his name. That's embarrassing. But someone like that who's got an interesting story about maybe giving up their entire career to go, or working.
Tommy Fines and Ed McMullen.
Ed McMullen, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
I think that relates more to what we're trying to do as well, and we could probably draw a lot from those. But I mean, having said that, we discussed Peter Molyneux as well. I think it'd be fascinating to hear his side of the story, because often you hear the developers that worked underneath him and kind of some of the struggles they had. It'd be interesting to hear his decision process, why he made those decisions.
I was going to say, I think it'd be interesting to read a biography from his senior programmer.
This is
one after the other.
The sort of industry legend around Peter is that he would talk to press and make up features that would then have to be implemented in the games. I'm sure you'll be referring to, but maybe not an authorized biography, but talking to people that have stories of working underneath them. Next email's from Eric Song. He says, hi Guy and his lovely guests. You didn't mention
thank you very much.
This is at the time I hadn't mentioned that you guys were coming on.
Right.
This was just before I put out on Twitter that you guys were coming on. But he said, first of all, I want to ask Guy if he's having fun with the Nvidia Shield. Does PC streaming work well? If I buy the Shield, that would be because of Skyrim, but the only concern is that the game is heavily modded, so I wonder if it will still work fine or not. And secondly, to his lovely guests, I want to ask how big your game collection is, and from that collection, how many titles would you consider completed? I don't have much of a physical collection of video games, but the only thing I can show off is my Steam and Origin collection of just over 100 titles. But if you ask me how many I've completed, I can say I've only completed a handful, since I'm the type of gamer who spends hundreds of hours on particular games like Skyrim, so I have little time to spend on others. I wondered if Guy and his guests were more completionists or collectors of video games. As always, keep up the good work. So to answer the Nvidia Shield question, I've had it for about a month. It's currently with photography for Wired magazine. I've been writing about it for a lot of different magazines. I don't know if you guys have seen Shield at all.
I've seen a video.
It's a shame
this man over here played to me.
So we're in the office
to watch it.
To a fellow developer. I haven't got it with me. It'd be great to show you guys. But essentially, it's the kind of killer feature right now is this streaming. Game streaming feature. If you've got relatively recent Nvidia hardware in your PC, you can stream. It was about 20 games, including DMC, Batman, Arkham City, Skyrim, as he mentioned. It's an interesting feature, but not one that is kind of. It's an interesting one because the number of times you want to play on a traditional controller in your bed while you've got to have your PC in the same house, and you've got to turn that computer on and go through that whole rigmarole. I'd rather just play on my PC, to be honest with you, but I don't know, you guys might feel differently. You might enjoy that console experience.
Is it? I mean, I think the interesting thing is, I'm coming back to Sony. So being able to stream to, say, your Vita, I can kind of see the logic, because you've got to run it on your television.
Yes.
So if you're then going off and running it on your Vita, like your girlfriend can watch TV, or
Yeah,
someone else
absolutely,
wants to watch it. I'm sure the Shield makes sense, but I can't quite see what the necessity for it is. As you said, like if I'm going to play a PC game, I kind of want to play on mouse and keyboard because that's what makes it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's. I think when the Vita when the PlayStation 4 launches and the Vita has that ability to play PlayStation 4 games, I believe it's going to be very seamless. So you can turn your PlayStation 4 on from the Vita. With Shield, you've got to get up and turn your computer on and do that whole thing. So it's very much a beta feature right now. But what I would say is, I put a call out on Twitter and said, has anyone bought a Nvidia Shield, and have they imported it? And it was literally silence. It was just no one got back to me at all. So I don't think there's a lot of excitement for this device out there at the moment. But it is an interesting device. I'm sure it's probably going to be the first iteration, and they'll keep refining it. But as to the question about game collections, what do you guys game on? Do you have a big physical collection? Do you kind of display it proudly within your house? What does it look like at home?
It's all dumped on those shelves.
Yeah, there's plenty of Xbox games down there. Yeah.
I was a collector back in my youth, making me sound like a really old man now. And I think in that time, if we go back to the Amiga 500 days, I don't think I completed a single game,
really,
quite honestly, because they were a lot harder.
They were quite difficult then, yeah.
And I think now I'm definitely more of a completer.
Right.
I think I like to get a game. I don't know whether it's just because I've become a bit tighter as I get older and want my money's worth from the game.
Sure.
So I'll sit there and just complete it. So now I've probably got a much smaller collection, all digital.
Right.
My fiance doesn't let me have games on show.
Right.
Clattering up the house.
Can you remember the last game you completed?
Thomas Was Alone.
Thomas Was Alone. Okay.
Yeah, not on the Vita.
On Vita,
yeah.
Right.
I'm very biased.
Yeah, you're really towing the Sony line well. It's very impressive. And what about you, John? Are you a collector? Do you complete a lot of games? Do you have time to play games at the moment?
We were talking about this before you came in, sort of saying, I think if you drew a graph of games I'd finished over time, it's the same way as Tom. Like, I don't think I've necessarily had less games as time's gone on, but I definitely have completed more stuff in the last 5 years than I did before that.
Right.
I do genuinely think stuff has got easier to finish.
Sure.
I think it's definitely easier to be a completionist.
Sure.
The collections, well, it used to be much bigger, but I stupidly left. I had about 250 games for the Atari ST, which was my pride and joy, and my mum very kindly charity shopped it last year. Yeah,
oh my
just
God.
like, oh, you don't want that rubbish anymore.
How distraught were you? Did you get over it? Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm all right now. I've been through the therapy. It's all good.
I'm sorry I brought it up. These painful memories.
Productivity.
It is weird going back and playing old games now, though. So we've got the Mega Drive down there somewhere, and it is going back and playing stuff that you played when you were a kid, and you were like, "This is impossibly hard." And I think you approach games differently, maybe when you're a kid than you do as an adult. I think you kind of maybe have a better understanding of sort of the mechanics and the design of it.
Yeah.
Or at least I do now. And I think maybe I look back and think they were hard, but when you go back and play them, you realise a lot of the time maybe they weren't. Maybe it was just because you were a kid, you didn't really understand what on earth you were trying to do.
So I think that answers the question. Steam and Origin, do you play many titles on there? Because I'd rather have the convenience of that. You were talking about PlayStation Plus and the rest of it, or downloading at least to Vita. I don't know. I used to have that thing of displaying, like your movies, displaying a nice game collection. I went to a friend's house and he had this beautiful game collection. I was like, oh my God, I need to display my games to show off my impeccable taste as well. But ultimately, I just don't have space, and they always end up in a box in the garage. So I don't really. Literally take the disc out and then throw the box into.
I like the adventure that you have when you've got boxed games where you open one case and it's a different game in there, and then you have to go to the case for that game, and it's like you have to follow the trail back to find the game you wanted to play. No, I think I know you're definitely Captain Digital now.
Captain Digital,
that's my new name. But no, I mean, obviously I've got my Steam account as well. But I think just in terms of my lifestyle at the moment, I'm finding whether it's the iOS stuff, the handheld devices for me are just so much easier to be able to pick up. If I've got a quick half hour there, it's just so much easier to pick it off the table and get playing like that. So that's kind of suits my lifestyle at the moment, to have it that way.
I've got to say, there is a joy to physical games, though. There's nothing worse than going, I've got half an hour, I'll sit down and play something, turning on Steam, and there's got to be, it's like, oh, Steam needs to do a king update.
Or whatever. Yeah, absolutely.
And then you can't play.
At least with Steam, you kind of like have all of those. It happens in the background whenever you load it up. But with console, you've got to download that update when you put the disc in, so there is that waiting.
Yeah.
The thing that needs to catch up for me is I've just been. We'll talk about it later. I've just been reviewing the Razer Edge, which is the PC I've got right in front of me right now. But when I download games to review on it, you really need, I've got a fairly decent connection at home, but I've just been at my parents' house, and downloading a 5 gig game takes a long time. It takes a couple of hours. So I wanted to play Grid 2 the other day, and it took ages to actually physically download. It's great having that convenience and having it there, but actually physically, like you say, getting it when you want it is still a problem. Although PlayStation 4 is going to have that ability to buffer
you get a little bit first.
if you want to play single player first, it'll download that portion of the game. Anyway, thanks for your question, Eric. Final email is from Paul David. He says, hi, Guy, and this week's as yet unconfirmed guest, possibly Natalie Portman. We talked about that in the last podcast. Unfortunately, Natalie was busy. Let me start by saying very much enjoyed the show. It's mature and intelligent about gaming without the need for nonsense that is so common in many gaming podcasts, which kind of brings me to my point. I found last week's guests, Chris and Bart, to be clearly intelligent and bright, but as I listened to the podcast and then the Fingerbang pilot, which is their mobile gaming show, I couldn't help but feel they weren't gamers or fans of gaming. They trod the line between satire and sixth form students finding themselves very amusing, something that as a gamer I found mildly insulting. Perhaps I'm being too hardcore, although as someone with a professional career in my 30s, I'm certainly not as hardcore about gaming as I have been in the past. However, not knowing the acronym DLC was surprising, as it has been common in games for around 10 years, and consistently their lack of interest in any games that are in any way mainstream painted an interesting picture of types of gamers that have evolved. It sounded at times like gaming had begun to get its first hipsters, where anything that became popular or sold in droves was automatically dismissed without even trying. Don't get me wrong, would rather prefer to play Journey than Call of Duty, but to dismiss shooters and other mainstream genres naively disregards the potential for emotional impact in games like The Last of Us or Spec Ops: The Line. It feels a little like dismissing Apocalypse Now because it's a war movie, or Toy Story because it's a cartoon. Overall, I enjoyed listening to the podcast as it was interesting to hear this different perspective, but I was left wondering what the future gamer will look like, and if before too long I will be an aging gamer as the cool future of gaming becomes more apparent. Keep up the good work, and that's from Paul. What do you guys think? Hipster gamers? Is that a trend? Will your game appeal to hipster gamers, do you think?
John actually got in trouble recently.
Oh, don't do that.
On a Eurogamer article.
Oh, yeah?
Because he referred to the Vita as a hipster. And the
Naively.
Yeah.
Well, the device itself, or the person that plays
the
it?
hipster of the console world.
Yeah. I think I was referring to the amount of indie games that were coming out on the Vita, and I think there's been that link, right, between indie games, a lot of which are sort of paint graphics, quite arty, maybe quite sort of abstract gameplay, and moustache twiddling pipe smokers. I'm
still yet to see people playing 3DS or Vita or anything really in the sort of pubs of Shoreditch, though. Still not. I haven't seen it personally. Anyway, that's just
Steam powered ones.
Steam powered ones. Yeah, exactly.
I think this question at the end: what does the future gamers of the future look like? It's probably his mum. I mean, it's everyone, right? I think gaming is becoming much more, or it has been, right? It's much more ubiquitous now. I don't think it's necessarily that we're moving to this point of trendy people.
There's a certain. I feel it though. There's a certain group of gamers around my age, so early 30s, that they are drawn to games that look like OlliOlli and that look like Journey, that look a bit different, and it's immediately like that art style. And I feel a bit hipster about it personally. I feel like, well, it's kind of like, I don't know if there's an equivalent in movies or maybe art, or it's the sort of art that you appreciate in general, where I'd even love to write a book about it, so that the influences of indie games, where there's a lot of interesting artwork happening. I think from a purely visual perspective, I'd much rather get into OlliOlli or Journey, or trying to think of another Kentucky Route Zero or whatever it is, just because the art style is so unique and it is very abstract. It's not very, it doesn't aim for realism. It's that abstractness that has I'm going to get back into that games as art thing that you seem to want to avoid. But there is a question in here eventually. But I mean, me personally, I'm drawn to games that are a bit more abstract, and I do feel more hipster about it.
Well, I think the guy who asked the question said he was early 30s.
Paul, yes.
Yeah. So same as myself. I think kind of our kind of age group. I suppose we were the first generation of gamers to a degree.
Yeah.
Is that right to say?
Yeah, I mean, there were gamers.
Kind of 80s.
80s feels like where it really came. I mean, if you want to get technical, there were games released late 70s, but yeah.
So we kind of, grew up with that kind of explosion of it. And I suppose people who are, 10, 12 years younger than us had a completely different experience of gaming. And so, they are going to view it in a completely different way. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. But like you say, in terms of music and film, it's things are going to be perceived completely differently. So I think it's big. I suppose a bit of a generational divide, isn't it? That's going to start kind of coming through. Kind of 20-year-olds are going to view it completely differently to how we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I was on the. There's no gaming equivalent, but I was on the train. There was this very young, like maybe 18, 17-year-old girl sat next to me on the train. She was talking to a friend about like wanting to see Shawshank Redemption for the, she hadn't seen it, she really wanted to see it. Obviously she wasn't born before that, but she was very young when it came out. There must be a lot of gamers that sort of are playing Call of Duty today who never experienced, I don't know, Outrun or just the early, like Outrun springs to mind for some strange reason, but any of the sort of classics that you and I are Space Invaders or will probably.
I used to. My pet peeve, which is sort of similar, is when people look at games that they don't have very good graphics, especially first-person shooters, and go, "Oh, it looks like Doom," and you're like, "Have you ever played Doom? Do you remember how bad that looked?"
I'm keen. Just before, thanks for your email, Paul, and hopefully I will try and avoid as much as possible. I've had the feedback; it's been very clear. Trying to avoid getting too many hipsters on the podcast. Anyway, Stuart Peters on Twitter just 13 hours ago says, "Which guys would you recommend for a new Vita owner?" I think this is particularly relevant to you guys. I've got Uncharted, Cinemora, and Gravity Rush through PlayStation Plus. Any that you would recommend as Vita programmers?
Men's Room Mayhem.
Men's Room Mayhem?
Yeah.
I haven't even heard of this one.
Just check it out.
Right, okay.
It's like the air traffic controller thing, except you're organising which urinal or toilet to use.
I completely missed this.
It's pretty cool.
I've got a real soft spot for Frobisher Says. You guys.
That's a good intro.
That's a good intro to the Vita. Yeah.
Hokum, if I pronounced that correctly.
I feel like I'm really out of touch on Vita, actually, personally. I've been playing a lot of 3DS recently. I've not heard of either of these games.
Looks really good. I had a quick play.
Is it out yet, or is it on the way?
I think it's on the way.
If it's at E3, possibly not.
Yeah, I think it's on the way, but that looks really good. And Tearaway as well.
Yeah, Tearaway is coming soon, end of the year.
It's horrifically obvious, but like Hotline Miami.
Yeah,
it plays so well on Vita.
Yeah.
It feels right on Vita.
I've actually played it on Vita. It was sat there in the Sony PlayStation booth. I just didn't have time. So I played Hotline Miami. Well, I had a look at Hotline Miami 2, but does it play? The controls work? Well?
Yeah, it plays. I mean, I didn't ever play it with controller on PC. It was on keyboard and mouse. But it felt like it should have been a twin stick shooter. It works really nicely on Vita.
And Luftraus is coming as well to Vita. Okay,
nice. So plenty of stuff. I think the current PlayStation Plus game, is it Virtue's Last Rewards? I'm trying to remember. Probably. I'm sure I saw it on an advert somewhere. Don't worry. No, it's all good. Quick read down of some of the tweets that I've had. George Thompson says, what does the panel think about post-season pass DLC like Halo 4, Black Ops 2, or is the a la carte way of Borderlands 2 better?
I'm sorry, we have no idea.
No idea. The wrong people to ask about this. Andy D says, Guy, have you considered having Drink Relax Play on your podcast to discuss the perils of opening and running a gaming bar? I responded to this saying I'd love to have those guys. Have you been to the loading bar?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, what do you think?
It's wicked. It's great. Such a good idea. Yeah.
So I'd love to get Jimmy on the show. So Jimmy, if you're listening, please let's do a podcast special down there.
And good work as well. It's a wicked place.
It's great. About time London had a gaming bar. Mattress said we need a new video game TV show like the classic Games Master or Bad Influence.
I think we sort of high-fived that tweet. Yeah.
There was another one on.
Do you think it's the format of Games Master or Bad Influence, or the actual being on TV that's important though? Because I think TV is kind of irrelevant to most gamers now, isn't it? It's kind of YouTube and
not according
Xbox
to that
dashboard and PlayStation.
I was going to say not according to that Xbox launch.
And I think the format's got something to do with it. You need some old bloke with a monocle with a weird metal helmet on telling you about games.
Right.
That was a
stroke of genius.
Format. Yeah. I think it does need that. Although there's guys out there doing amazing jobs with their own YouTube channels, reviewing stuff which work.
Those
Just
kids
well,
on YouTube.
Yeah, I'd love to see one personally.
We were saying it would be cool if they kind of made it more extreme as well. Like,
Right.
combined it with, like, I'm a Celebrity or something like
Right.
that. So, you got to play Super Hexagon. If you survive for less than a minute, they drop you into a pit of snakes or
You've
something.
got to play
I'd
Super
watch that
Hexagon
show.
while they're dropping snakes, aren't you?
Yeah,
Maybe.
potentially, or, yeah.
So that's yes. I think the feeling is, Matt. Yes, there should be another show like Games Master. Chris Slight, and this is, you have to excuse me here. This is a slight plug for the fact that we got nominated for a GMA. As Guy Cocker podcast got nominated for a GMA. That's Games Media Awards. I'll take that as a technical nomination for myself and at Pabosher, who is Philippe Boscher. So yeah, thank you very much for all the votes. And Chris is absolutely right. We're up for a Games Media Awards. So thank you for whoever nominated us.
Shall we high five that?
Yes, high five that. Yes. Pete Harwood, aka let's do this at P1STOL Pete
Pistol Pete.
7 Pistol Pete essentially. Hi Guy, didn't really enjoy the Fingerblast guys on the pod. Wasn't impressed with their knowledge. Thought they were boring. And then yes, finally after a trip to Waterstones, I tweeted which gaming icon would you most want to read a biography about, if any. Miyamoto, Molyneux, Kojima, Newell, as in Gabe Newell, Tim Schafer, Ken Levine, or Cliff Bleszinski. The most votes were definitely for Kojima and Miyamoto, so a lot of love for the Japanese game developers. So I'll look into that. Let's figure that out. So thanks very much. If you want to email the show, it's podcast@guycocker.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter. It's @guycocker. Okay, time for the news section. I've picked out this week's big and interesting news stories, and me and my guests will talk about them. So first up, PlayStation 4 and Vita bundle in the works to cost about $500. This is a rumour that was reported on videogamer.com. PlayStation Vita may be bundled with PlayStation 4 if this rumour is to be believed. According to that old journalist staple, a well-placed anonymous source of Machinima, Sony is working on a bundle that features both PlayStation 4 and Vita for around $500 in the US, and that will be made available at the end of this year. Sony has already confirmed, that remote play, being able to stream games from PlayStation 4 to Vita, will be mandatory to all PlayStation 4 games that don't make use of extra hardware, such as Move or the PlayStation Eye. So, guys, can you confirm or deny this? Is this happening?
We have no idea.
The well-placed sources.
It seems like the obvious route to go, doesn't it? I think it's a really good idea, in all honesty. I mean, in terms, especially with the crossplay, like he's mentioned, to be able to, you're kicked out of the living room for whatever reason, you take your Vita into the bedroom and the spare room and carry on playing.
Keep playing. So finally, so it's $350. I get confused with all the prices and differences. I just pre-ordered a PlayStation 4. I think it was £349. Is that right?
That sounds
about right.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So a $449 bundle with Vita would be pretty nice. £449 in the UK. It would be a good thing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Two consoles, that's pretty good. So we'll see where this one goes. Naughty Dog confirms the European version of Last of Us is censored. This was from Eurogamer. Naughty Dog has confirmed that the European version of Last of Us multiplayer is censored. In the US version of the game, the multiplayer features dismemberment and exploding heads. The European version multiplayer does not feature those. Eurogamer's US news editor Jeffrey Matloff is playing the North American version, found that the executions with certain weapons trigger exploding heads. The execution with the Shorty, which is a sword-off shotgun, blows your opponent's head clean off in the US version. In the UK version or European version, all you get is a blood spurt. Lots of different ones. I won't go through them all, but they're pretty graphically detailed. Apparently, it's to do with the German market. So Sony has censored its games for Europe in the past. It produces its versions of its game per region, so not by country. So the UK gets the same version as Germany and vice versa. This happened with Twisted Metal and God of War Ascension. And this is according to a site, Movie Censorship. So what do you guys think? Are you missing your exploding heads and dismemberment?
What's the fun in a nail bomb if you can't dismember people?
It's just a spurt of blood. That's disappointing.
I think from a developer standpoint, I can see the logic behind it, because you have to do obviously a separate kit for Europe and a separate one for America.
Yeah.
So then if you're having to do two builds for Europe and then go for the whole QA and submission process, for that, you're looking at
by territory,
a lot of extra time and cost as well. Should gamers feel cheated? I don't know.
I sort of feel like it's not like you missed out on a chapter.
No, it really is just exploding heads. But there is a certain, in The Last of Us, there is a certain. I've not actually played The Last of Us multiplayer, so I'm speaking from a single player here. But the that visceral thrill of someone's head exploding, when you nail someone, especially if it's your friend, you feel like you've really killed them. I sound like a psychopath, but what do you think? Is it you're not going to miss it from your version of Last of Us? Assuming, of course, you played The Last of Us.
I haven't played The Last of Us.
I assume at this stage everyone's played The Last of Us.
I haven't played The Last of Us.
Wow, okay.
I played it at E3 for about 10 minutes,
Right.
which was not enough time to get into the exploding head part.
No.
You walked off, didn't you, when you found that you couldn't blow people's heads off? Oh, fuck this, I'm going.
Just out of pure disgust. Yeah. So apparently, it's purely aesthetic, doesn't affect gameplay at all, but it's worth noting that PlayStation 3 games are region free, and again, this is according to Eurogamer, so if you're that bothered, you can import the US version and it will work on a PAL console. So if you need your dismemberment and exploding heads, then get onto the US version. Next news story, Nintendo's paid for Street Pass games earned it £2.6 million in a month. And this is again from Eurogamer. Nintendo has already earned more than $4 million, which translates to £2.6 million from its 4 new Street Pass games, company boss Satoru Iwata has revealed. Iwata revealed the figures to Japanese news source Tokyo Keizai, I think that's how I pronounce it, online. It's difficult to estimate how many users this equates to because of different pricing options, but Iwata previously said that 200,000 people had paid up for these games. Now, guys, I don't know if you're a fan of Street Passing or 3DS in general.
I sadly don't own a 3DS.
I would suggest that I know the allegiance to Sony may make this difficult, but the Nintendo 3DS has got some great games. I was playing it on the way down to your office. Fantastic games like Animal Crossing and Donkey Kong and Luigi's Mansion is really, really good. But the news story here is that obviously Street Pass was very, very popular at gaming conventions like E3 and the upcoming Gamescom. Mm-hmm. And lots of people were unlocking the games that were in there. So the puzzle swap, where you swap these puzzle pieces, and the Street Pass quest. So they bundled together a load of different games, which I've not actually bought. The bundle costs £13.49. So this is it's decent outlay, at least in my eyes. And the 4 games that feature are Street Pass Squad, Street Pass Battle, Street Pass Garden, and Street Pass Mansion. That, according to Eurogamer, they're all very enjoyable. But yeah, crucially, £2.6 million. So they were totally the right thing to do, really, from a business perspective, was to have those games paid for, because previously they were free and they made a lot of money from them immediately. Are you familiar with Street Pass Quest at all?
I'm afraid not either. We do need to get a 3DS. We've
Get
been
on it.
told to play Animal Crossing by everyone.
Yeah, including one of our coders over there who spends way too much time trading turnips.
I may be getting some Street Pass hits right in your office right now from my 3DS.
Okay.
But yes, I would suggest it. Yeah, Animal Crossing is a strange but very addictive little game. It's very, very good. Fun news story, there's one more that I want to touch on that's just come out while we've been doing the podcast. Sega bids on purchasing Atlus. So Atlus, the US publisher of niche titles such as Demon's Souls, Persona 4, Catherine, might be purchased by Sega if the Sonic Studio bids high enough. In recent months, Atlus parent company Index Corporation has filed for civil rehabilitation, which is the Japanese equivalent of bankruptcy, leaving the beloved video game developer in need of a new owner. According to a report by Japan Bloomberg, about 20 companies bid on Atlus, including Sega. Allegedly, bids reached the neighbourhood of about 20 billion yen, which is roughly about £132 million or $203 million, but it's unclear if this highest bid emanated from Sega or elsewhere. When pressed for comment, Atlus said that it had nothing to say at this time, and it will have to determine a final buyer by the end of the month. So what do you think? I know you were saying, John, that you're not a massive fan of Atlus titles. Persona 4 is definitely, and Demon's Souls as well, definitely holds a certain fondness in a lot of gamers' hearts. Catherine as well, which was just free recently on PlayStation Plus. What about you, Johnny?
Do we know if the other bidders are games companies?
I think they are all games companies, yeah.
Okay.
But there's always a chance that it could be someone new that's looking to get into them.
It's interesting because when we were talking before this about the sort of complexities of where these games go, with Demon's Souls being published by
Namco
different people in different
over
regions
here,
and everything else,
yeah.
you do wonder maybe what Sega are potentially bidding for and where they'll actually get to release this stuff.
Absolutely, and
they get it.
They recently bid on Company of Heroes developers, and they just released that game, and they were talking about THQ still owing them loads of money for that, so they're definitely on the acquisition path. They had about 10 years ago. They made a lot of acquisitions in the UK with Total War developers and Football Manager developers as well. So, what do you think?
It's been interesting to see what Sega are doing, because it wasn't so long ago that they were sort of making a bit of a push on iOS and funding quite a lot of titles. And
I'd say they're still doing that. Still quite a few of them.
With I remember there was some sort of backlash from the guys who got funded for Jack Lumber.
Oh yeah,
around being funded by Sega.
And what was this? What was the controversy?
I think that they felt they didn't get the support that they thought they'd have on the actual publisher side. So it's interesting to see them kind of skipping around in all fields where a lot of publishers are very much only focusing on one platform.
Yeah.
I feel potentially they got a bit lost when they stopped making consoles.
I'd say from having reviewed a lot of Android consoles and especially the Nvidia Shield, Sega definitely on there pushing Sonic hard. They're with on Shield, it's one of the games that you get bundled in there, and so I'd say they're pretty and they're pretty big on iOS still, I would say. But a lot of publishers obviously trying to get into that market or pushing harder and harder. The final news story I want to cover is Xbox One related. John Carmack at the recent what they call it, QuakeCon in the US said that the PlayStation 4 hardware and Xbox One hardware are essentially the same, and then recently they have bumped the clock speed of the GPU. I'm trying to find it. I just read it on the way down. I'm trying to find it as a news story. Has been increased slightly. So they're still tinkering with these machines at the very last minute. One would assume that they're basically going into production right now, or at least at the very latest September, because they're going to be presumably released in November. What do you think? I mean, as developers that are working on Vita, you might not be connected to this, but do you think that they're going to be able to compete broadly as two different machines?
It's becoming a bit of an arms race, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of technological capability.
Because there's a lot of talk about PlayStation 4 being more powerful and 50% more powerful with the headlines you read, but in real world terms, is it going to be? Yeah, this is the story. The Xbox One has been the processor inside there has been upped from 800 megahertz to 853 megahertz, which probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people.
Oh, well, we're going to have to stop working on Sony stuff now.
And go on Xbox.
Those 53 megahertz.
Those 53 megahertz going to make all the difference.
I can't, and I wish I could attribute this tweet, but someone tweeted the other day sort of saying, like, it does seem weird that we judge consoles on things like how fast the processor is or how good the graphics are.
It's always been that way. Remember, like 16-bit and 32-bit?
Yeah.
It's like all that 64-bit, well, N64 64-bit, and PlayStation isn't. And I don't know, it's, I guess, always been obsessed over by a certain section of game players.
Yeah, and I guess it's sort of, how much... Well, forever it's been the case that we kind of judge things on graphics. And, look at the new shaders that this can do, and look at how many millions and billions of polygons we can render now.
Right.
But I think the interesting thing is ultimately it's still going to come down to what games are on each console at launch.
Absolutely.
It'd be interesting to see, what do the consumers think about it? Are they taking much notice of these kind of small incremental tech changes? Or
I think
like
it comes.
John says, it's about the games.
The people you were talking about before, your friends, they probably don't care about it really.
But it's also interesting with the power of consoles. It feels like that power never really gets used until right at the end of the console's life. Like stuff like Shadow Colossus came out right at the end of the PlayStation 2's life, things like that, and that kind of really pushed it.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like we talk about all the power that this new console is going to have, and it feels like nobody uses it for the first 4 years of the console's life. It's only when it gets to the end that people really start to push it and actually really utilise that.
Yeah, and Gears of War 3, I remember looking at that game, really, really fantastic looking. All right, well, that's it for this week's news. You can find out more about these stories. I'll put a link to the running order in the podcast notes. Okay, time to talk about what we've been up to this week, what games we've been playing. Now, guys, I know you're busy developing a game, but have you got any games that you're enjoying at the moment? Any tips for our listeners?
Yeah, I've been playing Limbo.
Yeah.
This is my last Vita push, I promise, on the Vita, which is an incredibly dark game.
Yeah.
At first, it looks really innocent.
Both visually and thematically.
Boy, yeah. Bouncing along, and then he gets eaten by spiders.
Tom's also just had a baby boy, so it's...
Oh, wow,
it
okay.
makes me cry.
I can imagine. It's a rough game to play straight after.
I'm still playing Hotline Miami on Steam.
I've still not finished that, actually. I had a quick go again.
Complete it. John completed it, and it's, you got to play this.
Only takes a few hours, right, in total?
Depends how into it you get.
I just cannot. I love it, but I just cannot get past. I'm stuck.
Yeah, it's a game that I really struggle with as well. So you've played it on PC and Vita, or just Vita?
I finished it on PC, and then I tried it out on the Vita.
And Badland as well.
Yeah.
For iOS, really good.
Yeah, it's very popular actually at the moment. A lot of people talking about it. Explain it for.
So it's very simple. Literally one tap, you're this weird kind of flying hedgehog ball. Is the best way I can describe it.
Silhouette testicle.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that, but and you have to go. The levels are quite short, but then 3 challenges within each one.
Yeah,
and you collect other flying hedgehogs as you go, and it's about getting to the end of the level with as many of these hedgehogs as you can.
Right.
And they get horribly killed and mutilated along the way. And again, you end up feeling quite sorry for them.
The theme,
I hate violence in video games.
Right. I think I'm trying to remember if it's free or not, whether it's 69p
I think
or
69p,
right,
which is brilliant value considering all the levels are actually constructed. There's 3 challenges each. There's loads of replayability in that.
Okay, so Badlands I think it's just iOS, isn't it? It's not Android as far as I know.
So yeah, someone showed it to me on the iPad, and I've got it on the iPhone at the moment.
Excellent. Anything else? Anything you're doing in general, aside from developing games and playing games that are very dark?
No, my
you going to Gamescom at all?
Unfortunately we can't make it to Gamescom. We went to E3. We're going to be at Eurogamer.
Well, you went to E3, John.
Yeah,
sadly missed out.
John missed out because of his criminal past. OlliOlli will be at Gamescom, so if people want to go and have a play, they can go and find the Vita there.
On the Sony stand, or is it?
Yes, it'll be on the Sony stand there.
I'm confused because I was talking to the Sony guys. Maybe we shouldn't even talk about this, but I'm confused whether there is a Sony stand. I think there is a Sony stand.
Yes.
There's usually a massive Sony stand, but
and I think from what we've been told, Vita's going to be pushed quite hard at Gamescom, which is obviously good for us. I said I'd stop talking about the Vita, but I
you can't. You're just too good at this. I love the Sony stand at Gamescom. It's usually really high concept. So I remember playing Killzone 2 or 3 on. In a mortuary, the drawers that they pull out to put their bodies on. You lay on one of those shelves and then looked up and played Killzone. It was very, very high concept, like I say. It was very cool, though. They go all out on that stuff.
What we're doing at the moment is quite interesting in terms of the development side of stuff, is the tutorial. So, as John mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast, it's quite a hard game to play. It's got a rhythm to it, and when people first get it, that rhythm's so hard. If you don't get it, you can't really play the game or get a decent score. So we've had lots of tests in to check out the tutorial that John's made. The idea is we've had to sit here and watch them play it, and we're not allowed to say anything.
Sure.
And obviously the first iteration of the tutorial, there's some mistakes in it.
Sure.
But we just had to sit there painstakingly while people were going, I can't play this game. What's happening? The skater won't move. And John desperately wanted to
jump in.
I felt sorry for the one guy that got stuck for like an hour. After an hour, went, "Am I playing the game yet?" It's like, no, he's still on the tutorial.
Oh my god, poor guy. That wasn't me, was it? When I was playing it?
No. We didn't even have a tutorial when you were playing it.
Okay. So there's still some work to do on that, but that's been this is our first console title. The first thing we released was iOS. It's actually in a second game release. So a really interesting process for us to go through in terms of bringing people in and just seeing how they think about the game. Obviously in a completely different way to us, but it's been a real eye-opener for us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
In terms of we wouldn't think people would ever approach our game in that way, but it's a great process to go through.
Absolutely.
Hopefully it'll be better for it.
So you can check the game out at Gamescom. John, what have you been playing?
I've got 3. Pivot,
yeah.
which is, I realise probably everyone's now heard about Pivot.
I think it might still be just bubbling under at the moment.
Okay.
No, I haven't heard any other people play it.
You should totally grab that for iOS.
Yeah.
It's very cool. If you like Super Hexagon, you'll shout at this just as much.
What was your record on Super Hexagon? Did you manage to make it to a minute? Or
Oh god, no! I think it's about 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
Yeah, 22
about.
seconds. I think.
Yeah. But yeah, no,
So
like
Pivot's similar to that.
Yeah, it's got this kind of you're sort of orbiting a dot that's going along a line. But I just really like the thing that makes it annoying, which is obviously because you've got rotate clockwise and rotate anti-clockwise, but because you're actually rotating in space as well, the controls almost get reversed when you start coming down the screen or up the screen, which just really messes with your head. You feel like you're terrible at it. I play it on the tube, so I'm just really aware people are watching over my shoulder and must be like, this guy's terrible at this. He just keeps swinging it into and he's dead again. But no, it's super addictive. I've almost reached the end of the sort of campaign mode now.
Cool.
Totally worth checking out. And the other 2, Futuridium.
Yeah.
which is mixed bag,
Right. Okay.
which kind of feels like Shadow of the Colossus in space
Right,
with
okay.
pixels and shooting stuff.
And what platform's this?
I played it on PC when it was out for free, but it's now out on iOS as well.
Right, okay.
But it needs the iOS 6.
Right.
I've just been far too lazy, so I can't actually play it on my phone. But
Right.
it's out on there now. But it's got a wicked soundtrack as well. It's kind of all like drum and bass, dubstep-y
Cool.
music.
Is that not overdone in video games now? I felt like 2011 was kind of the big
Was the year of dubstep.
It was. Every trailer at E3 was the year of dubstep.
It sort of fits the visual of the game.
Okay.
It's very kind of chunky. Everything looks like it's made out of Duplo, basically.
Right. Okay. We haven't talked about this. I mean, the soundtrack of OlliOlli, by the way. Is it like? Can you give us a hint on the genre or any artists involved?
I think last time we told people what tracks were in the game, it was just reported as tons of people I've never heard of. We've got a big playlist in Spotify at the moment, and we're kind of working our way through. So we've signed a couple of tracks.
Cool.
They're kind of on a sort of electronic, dancey vibe. We originally went with quite a rock and punk soundtrack because it's skateboarding.
Yeah.
And then we realised that we've got a game that can be quite frustrating.
Right.
And that, listening to angry music while you're playing something frustrating kind of just makes you want to throw the Vita across the room.
Right,
So
and
maybe
you
it'd be
don't
better
want
to have something more mellow.
Fair enough.
I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention that I've been playing, and not a lot recently, but an opportunity just to give it some props really, is Sub Rosa by
Right.
Cryptic
Yeah.
Sea,
Sure.
which if you haven't played it and you like multiplayer stuff and stabbing your friends in the back, and
Who doesn't like that?
exactly, it's awesome. It's very, very cool. Totally
But
worth
you
checking
wouldn't
out.
shoot the guy in the back of the head when you got in the car with him.
I know, because I didn't want to get kicked off the server. I'm sitting in the back of the car with a gun in the back of the head, and Tom's going, shoot him, shoot him. He's like, he's on my team, just shoot him, it'll be funny.
God, it's violence. It's
Yeah.
violence. So this is on PC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Good stuff. I want to get your thoughts on. I've just for T3 magazine just reviewed this laptop. Are you into gaming laptops? The idea of gaming laptops? Are you more
Desktop.
desktop? Because I've really gotten into PC gaming over the last sort of 6 months, and but the weird thing is when you have, I don't have a gaming laptop. I use my MacBook Air, which has just died. So I've been using this. The Edge is very portable. It's actually, forget the exact measurement. I think 16.8 millimeters, so very thin. It's about 1.7 kilos, so it's heavier than a MacBook Air. But the thing about it is, you always think, if I've got this gaming laptop, this thing will play Battlefield. It will do everything. I'm going to play games all the time. You rarely do. You rarely actually boot up a game and play it. So that might just be down to me sort of working a lot. But I didn't find myself, unless I was reviewing it, just booting up a game. I played a little bit of Hotline Miami. But what do you think of the design of this machine? It's sat here right in front of us.
You played Hotline Miami.
I played Hotline Miami.
So you really stretched the
graphical
hardware,
capability
really
of
challenged
this
it.
thing. Yeah, this latest generation NVIDIA processor.
It does look lovely. I do kind of want to sort of touch it. And,
Yeah, it's nicely designed. It's not like a lot of gaming PCs. I'm looking at Alienware when I say this.
Yeah.
That is really, really thick and garish.
Well, you couldn't beat someone to death with it like you could with an Alien.
Could maybe if you wanted to, if you were.
You could cut them in
inventive,
half.
but-
It's so thin. But
But they couldn't quite resist putting the bright green keyboard on there, which seems to be a
Is it
prerequisite.
backlit? It is backlit, isn't
yeah.
it?
I think that looks cool though.
Do you?
Like, it's,
I think it's just one of those things where you're like, it looks like what I used to have, a black MacBook, and it's pretty much very identical to that. It looks great. You could use it in a boardroom, but there's the snake logo on it and the green lights, and it's just like
You can't bring that out in a boardroom.
You can't. PC gaming manufacturers can't release anything without just a bit of gaudiness, bright green lights or something. I'd love to have like a gaming laptop in an Apple shell, basically.
don't you think that's just because there's nothing else to differentiate them from a normal laptop?
Yeah, that's probably it.
You need to be like, it's a gaming laptop. The keyboard's neon.
Yeah, but people don't need to know that. Like, I want to be able to go and go to meetings, serious meetings. Not that I go to many serious meetings, but go to a meeting and not have this like bright green light or this logo with snakes on it.
To give it
Apple
its due,
sticker.
you did
Whack it on the
take
back.
it out, and the first thing I said when you came in was that's a very snazzy laptop.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
And by snazzy, I didn't mean that's a horrific snake logo on the front of the laptop.
It's snazzy.
It's snazzy. Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And then you mentioned it before, that there's a Atlas controller I've been reviewing as part of a big test of Android devices. So obviously loads of Android consoles coming out. Ouya,
GameStick.
NVIDIA Shield, GameStick, which I'm hopefully going to get in a couple of weeks' time.
I had a go on one of those the other week.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's cool. I think that the interface is a lot better from what I've seen. than Ouya, but GameStick is slightly less powerful if you want to get. I mean, it's running Android games, so it's not a major thing, but it's it doesn't run NVIDIA hardware, so it won't.
I think it depends what you want, right?
I think
those consoles.
It's not, you're not buying them for the graphics, really, are you?
Yeah.
And it's got that amazing thing where it's not much bigger than a USB pen drive, so you can just plop straight into the back.
It goes in the controller as well.
Yeah,
I love the fact you can put the stick in the controller and just take the controller with you.
We'll see how well that does.
Fingers crossed.
Number of delays on that one, but I can't wait to get my hands on it. But yeah, the green throttle is another. If you've got a controller, so if you've got a mobile phone that runs Android, you can use this green throttle Atlas. I'll show it to you guys after the podcast. To play games with a controller, and there's a couple of these devices coming out right now. There's a couple more coming for iOS later this year, apparently, because they've Apple at E3. There was it the Worldwide Developers Conference at E3 that was running while we were out there. And basically they've unlocked that third-party controller support over Bluetooth, which they've had locked for a long time. So maybe at some point you might have OlliOlli on iOS that can be played with a controller, or even on Android.
I remember all the tweets at that point.
Yeah.
Like Apple's doing controllers, video games are dead.
Right.
Pack up
Game
your
over.
consoles, yeah.
E3, game over.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
Okay.
Out of interest with those controllers, does the game need to support them, or do they just plug and play and take over?
Yeah, there is a device out there called the Arcos Gamepad, which has a gamepad. It's basically a tablet with game controller either side of it. It's like an oversized Game Gear or an oversized Vita. And essentially, what that will do is that will emulate touchscreen controls using buttons. So I was playing on that. Is it Into the Dead, the one where you're running constantly trying to get past zombies, or even Jetpack Joyride? So it emulates the touchscreen controls on the physical controller, but it's kind of a fudge. It has a tendency to break, and it doesn't feel accurate enough. And so, so yes, the games for Green Throttle have to be made specifically to support it. And there's not that many out there. There's literally about 11 games right now. So
I kind of think that's always the tricky bit. With
long way to go, but I think it's going to get more and more interesting in that area. Okay, time to look at some of the games that are out this week, what we think of them, what the reviews are saying. Really, it's a really quiet week this week. It's just really Tales of Xillia on PlayStation 3 that's coming out. Are you a Tales series fan?
I'm not.
Japanese RPG kind of.
I sort of I googled it when I saw it in your list and went, oh shit, that's had like 15 iterations. I probably should have heard of this.
Loads of Tales games, yeah, they are popular with Japanese RPG fans. Then there's Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons on Xbox 360.
Which looks very cool.
Yeah, it does look cool. And SteamWorld Dig, but you had a look at Brothers.
I did, yeah. I like the. From what I saw from the Let's Plays, you control two characters simultaneously with analog sticks.
Yeah, that's it.
Which sounds like rubbing your head and patting your stomach, but I think it could be really fun.
That gameplay mechanic is sometimes, like, when it's quite frustrating, it's quite addictive, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think so. You mentioned you've been looking at some Let's Plays. Have you been doing Let's Plays for OlliOlli as well, or are you looking to do those for YouTube?
It would be cool, but obviously there's the challenge of finding people who've got a Vita that they can record.
True, that's a very good point. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Because we've got the bonus with the dev kits is you can actually plug an HDMI and record off them.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how many.
You should get some YouTube stars down here to do that and have a play with the game and give you some feedback on it, and then do some.
Get them down. Yeah. I was going to say SteamWorld that you mentioned looks really cool.
Does it?
Yeah.
I didn't. Maybe I'm showing my lack of knowledge here and lack of preparation, but it looks good.
Yeah, don't gloss over it. It's the only one I've got anything to say about.
All right, let's talk about SteamWorld Dig. You talk about SteamWorld Dig while I actually Google it.
It sort of looks like Spelunky. I may have this totally wrong.
Okay.
Right? It looks like Spelunky meets Dig Dug.
Oh, okay, right.
You're kind of like wandering around doing.
I've got it completely wrong. I'm getting confused with a different game entirely.
Is this game not even out this week?
No, it says it's out on Nintendo eShop soon. So maybe Europe and Australia, it's out in 23 hours. We're recording on Tuesday. US release slightly later. No, it does look good. A fistful of dirt. I apologise to the makers of SteamWorld Dig because I'd got it confused with a different game. It's steamworldgames.com/dig if you want to check it out. All right, guys, thanks very much for your time. That's it for this episode. All that remains to say is thanks to my guests, and again a reminder where we can find out more about your game and maybe even stalk you personally online.
Okay, so the website roll7.co.uk, that's ROLL and the number 7.
Where did you get the name of the studio? I didn't ask before.
Is it a terrible story that is? We should tell it.
We should tell it. We couldn't come up with a name, and then at some point we decided that, the highest number you can roll on a dice is a
That's good.
6.
Right.
So
I was going to say, is it a board game
It's
reference
like
of some
one
sort?
better than what you could roll on a dice, like
cool.
Roll7. It doesn't sound so
see
bad
the
now I'm saying it out
disappointment in your
loud.
face.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You know, when you're trying to name stuff, I'm sure it's very difficult, and you go through this prolonged period of like, you know, when you came with OlliOlli, and then you have to change it because it was another game or something.
No, just because
No, it just takes ages to
too
say.
long.
And everyone keeps going, oi, 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 after you
They
say
still
it.
do go oi oi.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, but
there's
they're
a
wrong.
lot of blogs and online stuff.
Oh dear. And then personally, you said before your Twitter handles.
Yeah, at Thomas_Hegarty.
Yeah.
And John is at Flappy Fingers.
Happy fingers. Guys, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for inviting me into your office. If you have any feedback, please send it to podcast@guycocker.com. Next week, I'm going to be joined by some more mobile developers, lots of mobile developers. I will announce them on my Twitter feed. Keep an eye on twitter.com/guycocker for more information. And if you want to subscribe to the show, excuse me, that's quite difficult to say, to have them delivered as soon as they're available, please subscribe in iTunes. And if you're feeling generous, leave me a review or a rating. We'll see you next week.